Welcome to the new church year, to year A, to 2023 in church terms, and a passage which actually, for all sorts of reasons, sends shivers down my spine, not least the fact that I have the memory of Larry Norman whining away in the 70s, I wish we'd all been ready. But it is a chilling passage, and Lisa, you're going to help. I better introduce you, of course. Joel, who's actually currently with me in Wanaka in Central Otago. We're on a retreat together. Lisa in Palmerston North. Nicki in Brisbane. Lisa, some words of background to this very tricky passage.
Okay, so I thought it might be useful to think about when this passage takes place. So we're in Holy Week. We may be 3 or 4 days before Good Friday. And the day before this passage, Jesus has ridden into Jerusalem to the acclaim of the crowd and driven the merchants out of the temple. And then the next day, the day of our passage, Jesus goes to the temple where he's challenged by the Pharisees and Sadducees, and he comes out swinging. Almost a whole chapter dedicated to his public condemnation of the Pharisees and hypocrisy more generally. And that scene in the temple ends with a heartfelt cry of his grief for Jerusalem. And so our passage takes place at the end of this difficult day at the temple, just days before his death, a day after he arrived in his beloved city, weighed down by grief of what is to come. And he and his disciples have retreated to the Mount of Olives, which is a place of special significance to Jesus. So this passage is part of a quiet conversation just with his disciples when they ask him about when the fall of Jerusalem will happen. And at the beginning of the conversation, it's not always clear whether Jesus is talking about the fall of Jerusalem or his own death or the end of time. But in our passage, he comes closest to answering the disciples' question, which is when? And that's what we'll be discussing today.
Okay, thanks, Lisa. And I hear challenges emerging. And I'm going to you, Joel, because this is a confrontational passage. This upsets us. So tell us how you feel challenged.
Okay, I don't think it's a mistake, but I read two very contrasting commentaries on this. And one, which is possibly a slightly older one, said that it's entirely about the end of time. And the other one, which I tend to side on because it also agrees with Lisa, is that it's actually predicting the fall of the temple in Jerusalem, but using that as a metaphor for Christ's return on earth. And the challenge for me is that this piece of text is not knowing when, and that's the best thing, is that we don't know when that Jesus is going to return. And even Jesus doesn't know it. He says that only the Father knows it. And I love that, the fact that there's something that in the whole idea of the Trinity, there's something that God knows but Jesus doesn't. And I love that little bit of mystery and intrigue that goes on there. But for me, the big challenge is to be open to God's call when it happens, and whether it's going to be the end of time or the calls and the nudges that I know personally I've been receiving over the last year or two, and if not a lot longer actually, is actually being aware of those and being open to it. And also that bit about Noah's, the people of Noah's time, I love that because it's life going on as normal. They're marrying, they're working, they're getting married, all sorts of things are happening, and they're blissfully unaware of what God is doing, whereas we're given the opportunity to actually be open to God talking to us and actually being aware and being ready.
Thanks, Joel. And I should add, if I haven't already, that these are spoken words from somebody just on the eve of his ordination. So quite poignant, that sense of being ready, being called unexpectedly, being nudged. Nicki, for you, tell me about the challenge when you read it.
Well, you know how I like to really bring a personal touch to gospel conversations. Look, the big challenge for me comes from this imagery of end times and that some are miraculously airlifted elsewhere, but some are left behind. And I have to admit to the struggle I have with, as I grow in my faith, as I grow in my relationship with God, that I find that notion of God coming back, Jesus coming back just in one instant, harder to reconcile when I am growing in a God is present with me always kind of understanding. I have a lot more study to do on this particular kind of passage and the theology that it raises, but that is my challenge.
Well, it's a huge challenge, and especially when we have something like Psalm 139, which talks about God being us from the moment of conception and loving, nurturing us forward. Lisa, you've given us some background, but I want to hear where you find it personally challenging.
Well, I'm a control freak. I like things to be predictable and safe and in control. And, whatever this passage is talking about, what it reminds us of is that the future is in God's hands, not ours, and we can't know it or control it. That's why the disciples asked the question in the first place. They want to know, they want to be in control. It's why millennialist sects have risen up in every generation saying that they've cracked the code. They know, they've got this, they're privy to secret knowledge. They've got the inside scoop. And, it's a rare person who doesn't want this. So, the real challenges about any aspect of our future, how do we let go of that idea of control or this idea of needing to know? And also, how do we live in constant readiness? That's not easy.
No, it's not. Not at all. So let's go to you, Nicki, then, because we're talking about something unsettling, but where do I find good news here?
I think the good news is clear in that Jesus calls us, as Jesus calls his disciples, but he calls his disciples to witness and mentions doing ordinary things, from one activity to the next, and that with everything we've got, we too are called to witness wherever we find ourselves, constantly at the ready, but called to simply act, to witness, to be, to speak, to love. I think that's the essence of the good news that I find.
Reading between the lines of what you've said there too, it's a kind of call to integrity. I may just be mowing the lawns, but let's do it with integrity, a kind of openness to God in that moment. Lisa, back to you, just moving around, and you're tapping into the good news.
I guess I'm similar to Nicki here. I think, just as I'd said, this is bad news for control freaks. This is good news for control freaks, because we can't know. The future is God's timing, is in his hands, and we can let go of that. And that is a wonderfully freeing thing. And instead, we're invited to live fully in each day, fully alive, fully present, knowing that this day is God's day. This is the day, the gift we've been given. We wake up each morning to new opportunities to live out the gospel. That's glorious good news, even while it's a challenge as well.
Yeah, it's an interesting dichotomy. Joel, is all this making sense to you from your perspective?
It is. I'm taking a slightly different track because we're stepping into Advent and we're anticipating the birth of Jesus. And there's, especially if I know when I get home from Wanaka, there'll be the Advent candles on our table, and this weekend we're going to light the candle for hope. And so from here, I'm actually hearing a story of hope, the hope that we receive knowing that Jesus is returning, and the hope that we get from knowing that we're called to serve, to being called from our everyday tasks to be part of God's kingdom. And also the hope that we receive knowing that Jesus is actually already here in our world, working beside us in the field with the women grinding their hand mills, as the text says, and the hope that we get from actually knowing that we're part of the love that we get from Jesus.
So we're shifting there to a sense, a very positive, the companion Jesus, the leading us into the future that is Jesus' future. Let's ask how we apply, because we can be very ethereal and sort of a bit airy-fairy about this. So back to you, Joel. How do we apply it?
Okay, I looked at the two exhortations which are in the last part of the text, the two commands from Jesus that we have to keep watch and be ready. And they're easy things to do, but they're also hard things to do because we're distracted by all the everyday other things that we're up doing. But if we can do that, if we can keep watch, keep our ear out for God's call and be ready for it, and it will take us by surprise when it happens. and to respond. Our application is to respond when Jesus does call us.
And interestingly, you pick that up because elsewhere, when Jesus is talking to Mary and Martha, and he uses that word distraction as a cautionary word, don't be distracted, be open to my presence in the moment, God's presence in the moment. Lisa, for you, the control freak, I don't believe it, but let's hear how you apply this in day-to-day life.
Yeah, I think there is two wrong ways in which you might respond. So, you could read this passage as being in a state of constant stress. This day could be my last, which I don't think is helpful. Or it could lead to a kind of fatalism, a kind of, what will be, will be. And I don't think that's either of those are the call here. I think the call here is to see every day as precious, and all our mahi and our family time and our loving and our leisure as blessed time, which we share with God as our constant loving companion. And like the others, I was struck by the men in the field and the women at the mill. All the ordinary things, our works, our loves, our ordinary lives are just sparkling with grace and given over to God to do with as he pleases. And so I think the so what here is to be aware of this grace permeating our lives and to be fully present to that.
I'm loving hearing the word grace brought into this passage, which immediately just gives it that lovely dimension. So that leaves us kind of with you, Nicki, because I'm sure Brisbane is the same as downtown Wanaka where we are, but I still want to hear this application wherever we are.
Absolutely. I like to play around with different translations from time to time, and coming out of working with teenagers, I occasionally go back to the Message translation. Humour me for a moment, but it kind of helped me with the so what. So stay awake, alert. You have no idea what day your master will show up. But you do know this. You know that if the homeowner had known what time of the night the burglar would arrive, he would have been there with his dogs to prevent the break-in. Be vigilant just like that. You have no idea when the Son of Man is going to show up. So for me, the so what is about Jesus showing up. So here it is for me. Let's do our Advent Bible studies and go do home communions. Let's lead the midweek Eucharist and the Christmas services, preach and preside as if Jesus was going to show up at any second. And how will that change what we say, how we do things, how we show love? How will that thought change how we respond to everyone coming in the door? So it just brings me back to that lovely idea of where is God already at work and what are we doing to join in? That's my so what.
I love that the three of you have taken a passage that has often been used in quite a dark and depressing way, and you've turned it into wondrous good news, because that's what it is. So, Lisa, Nicki, Joel, thanks for being a part of this first Sunday of the new church year and bringing wonderful applied good news to us all. Thank you.